Hello cupcakes and welcome back to my channel. Also happy 2023, happy new year. I spent my new year actually at work, which was not as bad as I thought it was going to be. My company does a really good job of doing holidays for anybody that's stuck on site. So this is my official happy motherfucking new year. Bring on 2023. I think it's gonna blow 2022 out of the water. So today's video, I kind of want to start getting into some of the historical figures for either women in trades or really women that have made it possible for us to even sit and have these conversations. This kind of stemmed from September when I went to Calgary to visit my family, my dad's family. And we went to visit the library, the new library in Calgary. I'll plug in some pictures. It is absolutely stunning. And every time I'd been there before that, it was during COVID, so you couldn't actually go in and see it. But anyway, one of the exhibitions that they had in there, one of their little displays, was a list of rules for female teachers from 1915. So I'm actually I'll put it somewhere on here for you guys to read along. This is what stemmed this whole rabbit hole that I've been down for the last couple months. So the rules for female teachers in 1915. Number 1, you may not travel beyond the city limits unless you have permission from the chairman of the board. Number 2, you may not dress in bright colors. Number 3, you must wear at least 2 petticoats. Not 1, but 2. 4, you are not to keep company with men. Number 5, you must be home between the hours of 8 p.m. and 7 a.m. unless attending a school function. Number 6, your dresses must not be shorter than 2 inches above the ankle. That's not very much, man. Number 7, you may not ride in a carriage or automobile with any man unless he is your father or brother, in brackets, no kissing cousins, I swear to God. And number 8, you must sweep the floor at least once daily, scrub the floor at least once a week with hot soapy water, clean the blackboards at least once a day, and start the fire at 7 a.m. so the room will be warm by 8 a.m. And I actually do remember reading another thing when I went down this complete rabbit hole of history and how it used to be for women and blah, blah, blah. They actually had a clause, I think it was in 1900 for teachers, but if you were a female teacher, you were not allowed to marry while you were under contract. So you literally had to just be a spinster. Absolutely wild. So when I saw this, one of my best friends is a teacher. I ended up sending it to her to be bro, can you imagine? That just blew my mind. It's kind of cool to see how different things are 100 years in the making kind of thing. But then it got me thinking about what other rules there were for women, and obviously we know we've come a long way, but we've got a way to go. We know that we've got a little ways to go. Then I wanted to start looking into some of the women that kind of trailblazed for us, some of the pioneers of women in trades or women in male dominated areas. So got down a real fucking deep rabbit hole. I'm so excited about this. There's so many badass women that I had never even heard of before. So today we're going to start right at the very beginning. The first one that kind of caught my eye when I was researching women who paved the way for the rest of us blue-collared ladies to be able to do what we want to do. And so we are going to start this little series, I guess, whatever we want to call this. We're going to start with Emily Warren Roebling. And she was actually the first female engineer. So Emily Warren was born September 23rd in 1843 in Cold Spring, New York. So she was one of 12 children, and she was raised by her father, Sylvanus, a New York State assemblyman, and her mother, Phoebe Lickley Warren. Lickley Warren. Even kind of cool to see the different names and stuff that they had back then. I'll guarantee you they didn't have any girls named Kev, but Phoebe Lickley. Very cool. So anyway, she's one of 12 kids. She's got a fairly prestigious family. They were kind of upscale in New York. So she ended up attending a prestigious convent school, Georgetown Academy of Visitation in Washington. So here she studied history, astronomy, French, and algebra, in addition to housekeeping and needlework. So again, really good upbringing, one of 12 children. She was actually very fortunate to be in a position where her family could afford to send her out of state for her education. So anyway, she meets her husband, Washington Roebling, who is a civil engineer working for her brother. So this is one of her many siblings. Her brother GK, I think they refer to him. He ended up actually being a corps commander in the Civil War, and so she meets her future husband Washington when he's actually employed by her brother. So Washington was the son of John Roebling, a German-American engineer who was known for building suspension bridges, which is actually kind of cool too. So it's also wild to see how much things like ran in the family then too. I don't think there's as much of that now. It's not as prevalent to like follow in the footsteps of your parents. But back then, very much a thing. So when Washington first met Emily, he was smitten, like straight out of the gate, head over heels. He was later said to describe his wife as a woman of infinite tact and wisest counsel after they were married in 1865. And so this was almost like an odd case straight off the bat for me too, because I feel like in 2023, it's really hard to find a partner who thinks it's okay that you're doing what you're doing, wants to be equal with you, is going to cheer for you if you're perceived to be doing better than them. And back in those days where like women still had no rights, we were still property, you weren't allowed to divorce, oh God, you weren't allowed to have your own earnings, you pretty much like weren't supposed to leave the house. For Emily, finding a man who not only like loved the fact that she was highly intelligent and very quick-witted and like ambitious, he supported it and actually appreciated that. So I love this little old school love tale. They don't make them like that now, Mo. So they soon had a son, and they were actually sent over to Europe by Washington's father, John, so that he could study the latest techniques of constructing foundations underwater using caissons. I might be pronouncing that wrong. Don't come at me if I am. But basically, from what I could find, caissons are the watertight structures filled with compressed air, which allows workers to dig beneath the water for construction. So I'm almost seeing those as like, I don't know, foundational like chambers that allowed them to keep kind of like digging deep underwater. Maybe we'll find a picture. Could be way off base. Caissons. Anyway, so basically Washington's father John sent him over to Europe so that he could study like the latest technologies for underwater construction. Again, where his father was a German-American engineer, this was very much his like wheelhouse, and this was the kind of like breaking technology that they wanted to implement back in America. Back at home, the elder Roebling, so Papa John, I'm just gonna call him Papa John because I'm fucking myself up with these names already, and it's really not that complicated. Papa John was preparing for construction of the Brooklyn Bridge, the longest spanning suspension bridge in the world at that time, and also the first to be built with steel cables. Kind of a fun fact that I found out too. Papa John's family actually owned the steel cable factory in New York, so it was kind of cool for him to be able to like be the chief engineer and oversee this project of the world's longest spanning suspension bridge, and then also be able to use the steel cables that his family manufactured. So they ended up using a lot of their resources for this construction. It was very serendipitous. So unfortunately, after just a few days of construction, Papa John's foot was crushed in the pilings of a pier when a barge came into the dock. He contracted tetanus and he died less than a month later. And like thinking back to my first job as a millwright, the site that I was on, I actually ended up getting like a nail through my steel toe, punctured my foot. They sent me off for a tetanus shot right away. And so it was just so wild to think at how like readily available that is now, compared to back then when obviously this shit was like killing people off real quick. So we've come a long, long way there. So anyway, unfortunately, Papa John passed away. In turn, basically Washington became the chief engineer of that project after his father's passing. He kind of inherited the job, or inherited the project from his father. So by 1872, another thing I should probably interject, it took 14 years for the Brooklyn Bridge from start to finish. So this was like a long labor-intensive endeavor. It was actually super dangerous too. There were a ton of like unrecorded injuries and fatalities when the building was going on. They didn't have like safety harnesses, anything like that, and it was actually all built by hand, which again, technology these days, it's really hard to fathom that. And anyway, crazy. But by 1872, Washington became extremely ill, at the time succumbing to a mystery illness that left him paralyzed, blind, deaf, and mute. And so it was later discovered that he actually suffered from what they called Caisson disease. I think it's what we know as like decompression sickness or like the bends. So scuba divers, that's a big thing. Like you have to make sure as you're going down that you're actually giving your body time to like acclimate to the pressure, blah, blah, blah. Was not known obviously back in the 1800s. And so where Washington had been like taking part in so much underwater construction, he had gone over to Europe to study their techniques and obviously get involved. Years and years of that actually ended up taking a toll on him, and he got super sick. So it hit the point where he couldn't actually he physically couldn't leave the house. So unable to leave the house during his recovery, Emily ended up caring for him and became his liaison with the engineering team. So he would sit and he would watch the construction through binoculars from their kind of bedroom window, like super lucky fancy fam. They could actually see the construction area from where they were staying. But he ended up bringing his vision to life through his wife Emily. And so again, from day one, where he was so smitten with her and loved the fact that she was independent and intelligent and hardworking and ambitious, he had no problem whatsoever kind of making her his right-hand man in order to see this project to completion. She started off as a secretary. She was taking notes and going back and forth to the construction site. She negotiated their material supplies, oversaw the contracts, and liaised with the board of trustees. So over time, she had displayed such skill with construction materials and steel cables that it was assumed that Emily had taken over as chief engineer. So she showed like such proficiency in all things engineering and with this project and managing this project that it almost just became accepted that she was now the chief engineer, like she was acting in place of Washington. So she managed to retain her husband's place at the helm of this project, using her diplomatic skills and extraordinary intelligence to thwart competitors, which actually included the mayor of Brooklyn at that time, who tried to have her husband ousted from the project due to his illness. So I feel like business has not changed in the last 100 years, 150 years. Shit is cutthroat, but she, like on top of everything else, managed to ensure that they stayed on top of the project. Her husband was not ousted. Fuck you, mayor, thank you very much. This was like kind of another fun sidebar. Years later, in a letter to her son in 1898, Emily had said, "I have more brains, common sense, and know-how generally than have any two engineers, civil or uncivil. I already like her wit. But for me, the Brooklyn Bridge would never have had the name Roebling in any way connected with it," which is so true, because obviously if it hadn't been for her stepping in and becoming that liaison for her husband and the engineering team and then taking over the contract management and overseeing the project, really, they would have ended up being like ousted. I'm really digging that word. That was in like one of the sites that I was doing this research on. Ousted. What a fun archaic word. Ousted. But anyway, in the face of all of that, she was able to retain their position and keep their name on that project and ensure that they did get to complete it from start to finish. So badass on its own. Like, you go girl. I love this so much. So the bridge was finally completed after 14 years of construction on May 24th in 1883. Emily rode the first carriage across the bridge before the grand opening, said to have been carrying a rooster as a sign of victory. So I ended up having to do a little bit of like a deep dive on that, because I'd never heard that roosters were a sign of victory. I'd heard of like luck for some religions, blah blah. So this actually comes from, I'm gonna butcher this, Zoroastrianism. Zoroastrianism. Say that 5 times fast. So this is an Iranian religion, and it's actually one of the world's oldest organized faiths. But Zoroastrianism considers the rooster to be a symbol of the victory of light over dark, which I think is kind of cool. So good for her, like taking that little rooster and being like, fuck you guys, despite all odds, like, we built this motherfucker. So she just trotted herself over the bridge on her little carriage with her little rooster, which I thought was very, very cool. So she got to be the first person to cross the bridge too. You go girl. And she actually continued on after that. She had a very like interesting, colorful life. It was hard to get a lot of like deep information on it, but basically she ended up studying law at New York University later on, and she received a certificate in business law from the women's law class in 1899. So they actually didn't even accept women in law school at that point. So that was huge on its own, right? Like yet another area where she just blazed forward and was not taking no for an answer. And realistically, after 14 fucking years of being part of the Brooklyn Bridge construction and dealing with all the contracts, dealing with the business law, dealing with all of those intricacies on top of overseeing construction, like she for sure would have been well versed enough to be able to make it into a business law course. So thought that was pretty cool. She got certified in 1899. She also argued for equality in marriage in an Albany law journal, and she traveled around the country lecturing. She also joined the Daughters of American Revolution, so I had to do a little bit of a deep dive into that one too. I'd never even heard of it. Obviously, being Canadian, it's not something that I would stumble across for no good reason. So this was actually founded in 1890. And they say that it is a lineage-based membership for women who are directly descended from a person involved in the USA's efforts towards independence. And doing another like little deep dive on that one too. There actually was the Sons of the American Revolution, which had started like July 13th, 1890, I believe, and they refused to let any woman join. So it was founded by these 4 women, one of them being one of like George Washington's descendants. They said, fuck you. Okay, cool. We can't join the Sons of the American Revolution. Well, we're going to start the Daughters of the American Revolution. And it actually is still going today. So it's just kind of cool that she ended up joining that. She had ties to, I think she had ties to like the Mayflower or something. A little bit more available on her like father's history, just where he was a state assemblyman. But anyway, super interesting to me. So she was technically the first female civil engineer back in the fucking 1800s, man. She literally oversaw the construction of the Brooklyn Bridge. And so the more I started diving into this, it like sparked more ideas. I found more and more names of these like crazy cool women who have paved the way, who have done some really cool shit. And again, it's hard enough for us being like women in trades in 2023. Imagine like what the woman had to face back then in terms of everything. Like again, you were property, you couldn't vote, you didn't have a voice, it was improper to be in public with men that weren't related to you. Like there's just all these crazy things that come along with it, especially when you're in one of those like societal families. And then for these women to turn around and be like, okay, you know what, fuck you, like I want to do that man's job, I do want to be part of this, like this is what interests me, I don't want to do needlework and housework and raise a fleet of babies and have that be my only source of like joy and purpose in life. Just very, very cool to think about how radical those ideas must have been for them. So I've got a bunch more names that I want to do. If you can think of any super cool women in history that like paved the way for us, or even just like interesting women to do with like being in a man's world, comment them down below or go ahead and send me some names. I love doing this kind of research. These should be pretty quick videos, but interesting. The purpose of this channel is to promote women being in trades, to talk about all things being a woman in trades, and I think that being able to step back and appreciate those that made this possible for us is important too. So this is my latest tangent. 2023, man, it's going to be a mishmash. I've realized that I'm not good at one particular niche. I'm good at talking and not shutting the fuck up. But I got very uninspired when I had to sit and try to think about like just relaying my experiences. And some of them have been really shitty, so it's very easy to get caught up in those like dark little webs of my brain. So I want to be able to intersperse little bits and pieces of other people's stuff, of actual history, cool fun facts, some threads that I think are like need to be shared from the Reddit fam that I found on there. So if you're still here and you want to keep showing up, please do. If you're not already subscribed, go ahead and do that. If you found this little bit of history from Emily Roebling, the first female engineer, interesting, give us a thumbs up. Thank you for sticking around. Thank you for showing back up. Happy 2023, and you will actually see me next week for another video because we are keeping the good times rolling. And I'm even going to get my hair done today, so I'll even look fresh for the new year. Thank you so much. Hope you guys had an awesome end of your 2022. And if you didn't, I feel you. But I'm hoping 2023 is a thing of beauty for everybody. See you in the next one. Bye.